Well, good morning, everyone. I'm James Blake. I'm Chair of ACRE, Action with Communities in Rural England, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Village Halls Week, which kicks off this morning for the 7th year, celebrating the contribution that village halls make to rural communities. Just a few words from me by way of introduction before I introduce you to our speakers and to our panelists who are going to be joining me for the session this morning. I'm sure that if you are joining us today, you won't need me to tell you just how important village halls are to local communities. Village halls are often the only place locally where people can meet and socialise. And there are over 10,000 halls in England alone, and they provide a wide venues for a wide range of groups, activities and businesses, from Tai Chi to bowls, playgroups to weddings, as well, of course, as hosting many vital services such as post offices, doctor surgeries and libraries. Estimates suggest they sustain over 500,000 livelihoods connected with the use of halls across the country. In recent years, we've used Village Halls Week to tell a specific story about village halls each year. So in 2021, obviously still very much in the pandemic, we celebrated that many of these community buildings had been around for 100 years, and we set up a doomsday book to record their hopes for the future. In 2022, our theme was innovation, and many halls shared pledges on social media about some of the things they were doing. And last year, we focused on how village halls provide warm, welcoming and inclusive spaces to those most affected by the energy and cost of living crisis. So our theme this year is Go Green. Obviously, this is a topic of interest to many halls who've seen energy bills literally go through the roof in the past couple of years. But it's also, I think, a recognition that there are many things that hall management committees can do and are doing to make a positive mark on the environment and take steps on the road to net zero. A couple of years ago, we surveyed village halls, and over half said they were facing financial difficulties due to rising energy prices. And many were interested in what support there was to help reduce energy consumption. And of course, it's not just about energy within the hall. Village halls often work with the community at large to think about wider initiatives to go green. And throughout the rest of the week, we'll be considering how halls are pioneering new approaches to encourage positive environmental behaviour, things like reducing or reusing or recycling, how they can provide a space for environmentally minded groups, whether that's conservation volunteers or repair clubs and so on, and how they can support those working to improve local green spaces, sometimes associated with the hall itself, whether that's around wildlife habitats, community food growing or other green space. It's certainly a theme that appears to have caught people's imagination. So we've had an overwhelming interest in this year's campaign. We have over 250 halls have got in touch to say that they're planning some kind of local event or open day, which is just fantastic. And from experience, we know that many more will get involved as the week progresses by sharing things online. So we'll be looking out for interesting stories, photos and media reports over the next few days. And we want to share those widely. So if you've got something, please do get in touch or post to social media using the hashtag Village Halls Week so that we can spot that and promote it accordingly. I should say also that the campaign this year is buoyed by the spring budget a couple of weeks ago, where the Chancellor pledged a welcome uplift of £5 million to the Village Halls grant scheme that ACRE is currently managing. More details to follow, but clearly that's going to be very useful if you're a management committee seeking funding to decarbonise a building. And just to emphasise the government's interest in village halls, the Secretary of State for DEFRA, Steve Barclay, is, as we speak, visiting Little Thetford Village Hall in his constituency. So I'm very pleased that to mark this theme and Village Halls Week, we're going to be publishing today a new design guide to help groups support and retrofit village halls by improving insulation, replacing heating system, and even generating electricity. So this guide's been produced for us by Ben Stagg. Ben's the founding director of Stagg Architects and has over 20 years' experience in the field. He graduated from Sheffield University in 2000 and then worked at a number of practices before setting up his own firm in 2011. Ben's got a strong interest in first-hand experience in low-energy design and construction, and completed an extensive and highly successful retrofit of his own house, reducing its energy demand to less than 20%. So clearly he puts his money where his mouth is on that. Ben got in touch with us last summer, asking whether village hall committees needed any extra support or advice on making their buildings more energy efficient. Obviously, the team in Acre were more than receptive, knowing that this was such a big challenge at the moment facing rural community buildings. So over the last few months, Ben's been out visiting halls that have already made improvements to their buildings, learning from their experience and putting together the best practice guide that we're launching this morning. It includes and documents the process and various considerations that a management committee might expect to encounter on such a journey and some of the technological solutions that can be deployed. And all of this, I should say, has been made possible by the generous contributions of 8 commercial sponsors who are at the cutting edge of the net zero revolution. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Ben, who will talk about his experience of producing the guidance and what he's learnt along the way. And then after Ben has spoken, we'll be joined by a panel of representatives of a number of village halls committees and indeed people from the Acre team who will take questions from yourselves, whether on Facebook, YouTube and Instagram. And I'll introduce the panelists when we get to that point. So I think at this stage, with that, Ben, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you, James. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Village Halls Week. It's great to be a part of it this year. Philip, are you able to get the slides onto the screen and then we can start the presentation? Okay, that looks good. So what I'm about to show is a presentation. It's a summary of the design guidance. It's the work we've been doing with Acre over the last 6 months or so, helping village halls stay warm, save money and reduce their impact on the environment. This isn't the actual design guidance. That's available as a PDF document on Acre's website. There'll be lots of links, if you haven't seen one already, to take you there so you can download the whole thing. But what we'll do now is just talk through and give you a flavour of what's in the document and what it's actually about. So the purpose, well, it's stated there really. It's to inform and inspire village hall committees to get people started on their net zero journey. And as it says, to help you to do that with simple and practical guidance and guidance that's directly applicable to village halls. So the document is split into 3 main parts. The first, part 1, is how to do it. It covers a range of topics which we'll go into. Part 2 is what actually you can do to improve it. And then part 3 is case study projects that we went to look at around the country. There's 6 of those. We can go into a bit more detail on them. That's the order the documents set out. For the purposes of this, we're actually going to dive straight in on the case studies and then do part 1 and part 2. So where did we go? We went to Cumbria and we saw an amazing village hall, Skelton Toppin Memorial Hall, where it was built in 1923 and they replaced their old 50 kilowatt oil-fired boiler. So they're no longer reliant on fossil fuels. They've moved over to electricity to take advantage of the grid decarbonising. They insulated their hall, the walls and the roof, and in the end they did the floor as well, although they didn't expect to in the beginning. They're putting in an infrared heating system, and on the roof they've installed 60 solar PV panels. So they have a very nice synergy now whereby the energy from the PV that's generated can actually power the infrared heating. And they've got figures for their PV. They're very much into their PV, 17,500 kilowatt hours of electricity generated last year. If you look in the guidance document, it goes into detail about what that actually means. Just to say, Bob and Bob, hopefully that were the people that did Skelton Topping Hall will be available on the for questions and answers later. Second case study, Hurst Green Memorial Hall in Lancashire, another amazing project. Here they focused again on insulation, replaced the windows with new double glazing, and interestingly they installed a ground source heat pump. So they have a field to the rear. So they were able to put in a shallow system. They used local farmers who actually dug the field up, put the pipes in, and then covered that back over. Complete transformation of their hall. And it now means that they let that out regularly for weddings and for birthday parties. It's incredibly popular. They actually have bookings from, I think, sort of 10 or 12 miles away in Blackburn. So they now have a regular and reliable source of income, which has been a real game changer for them. Haddenham in Buckinghamshire, we have Beth to help later answer any questions. Again, a kind of three-pronged approach, as well as insulating with Knauf mineral wool, the actual village hall space. They switched to an air source heat pump. So they replaced their 115 kilowatt gas boiler with a much smaller, simpler electric system. They put solar panels on the roof, so a 48 solar PV system. And interestingly, Haddenham have also put in EV charging points. Again, very nice synergy between these three things. So the PV energy can be making electricity that then charges up the cars and or powers the heat pump. In the summer, when they've got a lot of energy, the EV charging will be particularly successful. We looked at 3 other case study projects that were also all amazing, different in different ways. We haven't got time to cover them all in great detail here, so I'll just go over them swiftly. David Walden from Trent is available for questions afterwards. So Trent's in Dorset. They insulated the roof and walls. Interestingly, they built an extension as well. So the building there where it says Trent, the right half of that was actually new. So they had other interesting things to deal with, as well as just decarbonising. They replaced their LPG heating system, again with an air source heat pump, so entirely electric now. They're looking at putting solar panels on as a subsequent phase. Hewish and Puxton in Somerset and Otterhampton, also in Somerset, they carried out extensive insulation work. At Otterhampton, they put in a PV panel system. Interestingly, Hewish and Puxton and Otterhampton actually both stayed with their existing heating system, but that's okay because they've insulated the building, and what that means is that at a later date they could switch over from their gas and their oil systems to an electric system. So these projects can be done, and we'll talk about that more, as a phased approach, and all very successful projects. I need to say a word about the sponsors for the project. So there was no actual funding for this. So all the funding we have has come directly from these companies, to which we are very grateful. They were a joy to work with and incredibly enthusiastic and committed to helping communities in their net zero journeys. So I'll briefly just explain about each. In no specific order, Utility Aid are also long-term partners of Acre. They can help village halls with a wide range of energy matters, including invoice validation, net zero, carbon reporting, and energy auditing. Knauf Insulation are manufacturers of mineral wool insulation products suitable for use in floors, walls, and roofs. Baxi are manufacturers of air source heat pumps and instantaneous hot water appliances. Herschel are manufacturers of infrared heating systems. Selector Glaze, manufacturers and installers of secondary glazing. Facro are manufacturers of roof windows and loft ladders. Heatable, who are installers of solar photovoltaic, or PV, they shorten it for a reason, PV panels. And ZolBV, who are installers of electric vehicle charging points. Now, together, these really, they cover a lot of the products and services that most village halls are going to be needing in their net zero journey. So we really do encourage you. They're ever so helpful. They've got a lot of information. They're leaders in their field. We do encourage you to get in touch and get in touch with them and use their products where you can. So moving on to part 1 of the document, which is all about how to do it. We look at 5 key things. Number 1, assembling a team. 2, working with professional consultants. We then look at the actual design and construction process, how you go through that. We look at how to pay for it, incredibly important, obviously. And then we finally look at understanding energy use. This is all a kind of a background information before we look at what it is you can actually do. So, assemble a team, really important aspect to the project. All the case studies we went and saw had at their heart a core team. And that was typically, I would say, typically 2 or 3 people. Don't try and do it on your own. It's far too much and it won't be as much fun. We found if there were 4 or more than 4 people, 5, 6, communication starts getting difficult. So typically we found about 3 people were very good. 1 deals with funding applications. 1 typically tends to be more technical and can deal with contractors and subcontractors. And then a 3rd might be more into kind of community engagement and PR and speaking to people. It doesn't have to be that way. There's various ways you can do it, but you do need that kind of small core team. You then need to involve the community. And this is really important. All the case studies we talked to, very successful. And it was because they went out there and spoke to people. Don't see the community as a kind of a problem. Use them. They've got skills and knowledge. Get them involved. And it's amazing what you can get back. The other thing I would probably pick out on this is make a plan. Don't dive in and just start doing things without knowing and having agreed where it is ultimately that you want to get to. Second issue we looked at, working with professional consultants. Now, this was interesting. As architects, we were quite keen to get feedback on this. When we talk about professional consultants, we do mean architects, surveyors, engineers, project managers. There's a whole range you can choose from. If I'm honest, we got mixed feedback from the case studies in terms of who they'd used and how that went. So we've included some lessons in the document that we think will be helpful. And primarily, this is about making sure you engage the right type of professional, making sure you're clear about what it actually is you need from them exactly, being clear about the project brief before they get started. So there's a few lessons in there. I mean, professional advice, absolutely invaluable at times. So we would recommend, obviously, getting professional advice, but just being clear about what exactly it is that you need. So there's information all about that. There's then information on the design and construction process. So planning permission, building regulations, how you then get the building, how you get the works undertaken. Do you go out to one main contractor who does everything, or do you go out to the individual trades and manage it more yourself? Depending on the scale of project, there's no one solution to that. So it very much depends on what you've got as to how you go about it and what you want to do, what you want to achieve. We talked briefly about construction and construction contracts, and then the issues post-handover. So the importance of explaining how your building works to other users of the hall so that they understand it as well. Allied to that, also important to monitor your energy use when it's finished, because ideally we would like to understand more about energy use before these works are undertaken and then compare it with energy use after. So the monitoring is very important too. How to pay for it. Very important subject, obviously. Grant funding, there's a section on what grants are currently available. What the pie chart shows here, this is a summary, if you like, an average of the 6 case studies we looked at and where they obtained their funding from. So, I mean, what's clear for me from that is that it comes from a wide range of sources. There's no kind of one big pot of money that will pay for this. So in the grant funding applications, you've got to go to a lot of different bodies. You've got to keep trying. And it would typically come from 6, 8, maybe even 10 different pots of money that can range from £500 or £1,000 up to £50,000. We talk about construction costs. That was obviously a very big issue for all the case study projects over the last few years, very difficult time. Some of these projects started in 2019, just before COVID. They then had to deal with that and deal with inflation, but they've managed to finish great projects. We talk about contingency, the need to have a little bit spare to deal with unforeseen circumstances. And we talk a bit about VAT, of which there was some good news towards the end of last year, some relief coming in for energy efficiency measures for organisations, charitable organisations. So very much worth looking at that. There's then a section on understanding energy use. So this is to do with what I spoke about before, understanding how much energy does your hall use currently and how much will it use after these works. So you want to see a reduction in the kilowatt hours used per year. Tied to that, of course, you have the cost of that energy. So you then need to be looking at reducing energy bills, how that relates, how the cost can come down. Obviously, doing work that makes the hall warmer and then also cheaper to run is a massive double win. And then we look at how that ties into carbon emissions. So the various carbon factors for different fuels. This is all about how it's important to move away from gas and oil if you want to be environmentally friendly, move on to an electric system that can then use the decarbonising of the grid to reduce the impact on the environment, and how things like photovoltaics can then feed into that. So for those people, some people may be familiar with the interaction between those 3 things, energy use, cost and carbon. But for those that don't, there's a section in there to help explain that to you. Part 2 of the document is all about what you can actually do. Again, 5 things we've highlighted, 5 key points. The first is all about reducing energy consumptions. We call it fabric first, deal with the building, insulation, basically. Number 2 is about switching to clean energy and clean heating. So that's again about the transition to electricity. 3 is about installing renewables and making your own energy. There's a section then on making sure that the hall is comfortable. It considers some other issues as well. And then finally, looking beyond the hall, looking at the area around the hall, how do people travel to and from the hall, issues of management, communication, etc. So the first part of the document in terms of what you can do, this fabric first, reduce energy consumption. Our sponsored partners, Knauf Insulation and Selector Glaze, come in on this aspect. It's all about reducing heat loss. So trying to, the first thing, save as much energy as you possibly can. There's a section on historic and listed buildings in there. So if you're in a conservation area or you have a grade 2 listed building, for example, don't think there's nothing you can do. There are things you can do, but you just have to be careful about how you go about that and be sensitive. So there's information on that. We then look at switching to clean energy. So the second section, briefly we talk about don't miss any opportunities for engaging with community energy networks. 2 primary ways of heating a hall when you change to electric. I mean, in the past, electricity had quite a bad reputation being used for heating. It was seen as either, well, generally both expensive and inefficient. These days you have infrared panel heating and you have heat pumps, and both are great, very successful technologies. Which one of those systems might be good for your hall, might be the right decision, very much depends on the type of hall you've got, how you want to use it. So you need to look at that in more detail before deciding. Again, 3 sponsors just to mention here: Utility Aid, Herschel, who make infrared heaters, and Baxi, who make heat pumps, have provided further information in the document about their technologies. What to do next? So once you've done that, once you've reduced your energy use, you've switched away from fossil fuels, you're on electricity, what can you do next? We would say then, well, generate your own electricity. This doesn't only mean solar PV. There's other forms of renewable energy that you can use, but typically most case study projects and most halls probably will be looking at solar PV, so they can then generate their own electricity. And it's really important because the combination of those things, reducing your energy use and then switching to electric and then generating your own electricity, the compounding nature of doing that each time is really very powerful in reducing your energy use, your bills, your cost, and carbon emissions. A lot of the case study projects put in PV, we'll hopefully hear more about the installation at Skelton Topping, which was very successful. Yeah, so we'll move on from there. Other things you can do, it's important to make sure the hall is comfortable, which means looking at ventilation. We would usually advise natural ventilation as opposed to mechanical. Looking at lighting, reducing artificial lighting as much as you can, so you can rely on natural daylight. Facro are manufacturers of roof lights, which can really transform village hall space. So worth considering roof lights in your project. We look at how to reduce overheating, and then allied issues which perhaps aren't directly to do with energy efficiency, but the importance of use this opportunity if you're doing building work to make sure your hall is fully accessible. Inclusivity is a very important part of this, sustainable communities. It's a good opportunity to deal with acoustics. They can make a big difference to the comfort of a hall. And finally, water and materials, there's a section on that as well, so we've not overlooked anything. Finally, EV charging is a real big topic at the moment. We have Zolb EV on the panel, sponsors who can help provide information on that. Again, as I said before, it works very well if you've got a PV system, particularly in the summer where you've got surplus, you can be using that to charge cars. So any questions, do get in touch with Zolb. We also talk a bit more about management and communication within your hall and how you need to use that. And ecology and biodiversity, think about the surroundings of the hall and what else you can do. So real quick summary here, because I think I've used my 20 minutes. Assemble a team. As I said at the beginning, don't try and do it on your own. Really important. It will be more fun as well if there's more of you. Be strategic. This is another thing I didn't mention before. Do engage local partners. So we'll hear from Beth at Haddenham how important that was to their project. Use their knowledge too. Involve the community. Take them with you. Don't be scared of them. Harness them. Use their skills. Make a plan. Really important. Don't just dive in without knowing what you're going to do. You can phase the work. That's absolutely fine. It can be a 3 or 5 year plan, but know what it is you're going to do and where you're getting to ultimately. Keep calm and carry on. Grant applications are incredibly difficult. We've heard that's sort of the hardest part of the process, some people said. You've got to just keep going on that. There is money there, but it sounds like it's not the easiest to process. Appoint professionals, absolutely. Expert advice, very much needed, but just be clear with them about what you need them for. And finally, be prepared. There will be 1 or 2 surprises that perhaps you weren't ready for. So have a small pot of money to deal with those. So that's everything. Thanks for listening to that. And we hope you enjoy the guidance and find it informative and inspiring. Back to you, James.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that. Just unmuting myself there. So it's so helpful to just have that step-by-step guide. It's really clear, as I think you can see from the diagrams, and you'll see that also in the guidance itself. And I have to say, looking at some of those pictures, I suspect there's quite a lot of envy around in the of how they looked after those transformations. So thank you very much, and we'll pick up on a few of the specifics in just a minute. So we're going to move on now to the Q&A panel. So hopefully on screen, we're joined by a number of colleagues. So if I just introduce them to you, and then we'll kick off the Q&A. So first of all, we're joined by Deborah Clark, who's Acres Village Hall's manager. A number of you, I'm sure, will already know Deborah. We're joined by two colleagues from Skelton Toppin that Ben was just talking about. So we've got Bob Bravantia, who is the Secretary and Treasurer. Hi, Bob. We've also got Bob Towers, who's the Chair of Trustees there. Hello, Bob. We've then got, moving further south, we've going to Haddenham. So we've got Beth Knighton, who is the Chair of the Management Committee there. Hi, Beth.
Hello. Hi.
Then we've got David Walden, right on the down in the south, from Secretary from the Trent Village Hall in Dorset. So I think that's everybody. So I know there's already been a few questions on the chat, which is great. The comments, please keep your questions and comments coming and engage in the debate there. That's great. Just to kick us off there, before we get into the specifics, but I'm going to ask perhaps a question to all of our kind of Village Hall colleagues. Perhaps you could just start by almost giving us a bit of a sense of what inspired you to start, to make the improvements in the first place. What did you want to achieve, and how did you get going? And perhaps if I start by coming to Bob Towers on that. We sound like we can hear you, Bob. Is that?
Yeah, I think you're.
Oh, you can now. Yep, that's good. No, don't think we can we? So maybe I could ask, can I just check in with
this right? Is that any better?
That's better.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. You pay to have somebody on your committee that's good at technology. Our inspiration really came from the building itself. 1923, it was the state-of-the-art technology at that time, and the fact that we were going to have our centenary in 2023 with an opportunity of going green.
Thank you, Bob. And anything that Bob P, you want to add? Obviously, I know you're both from the same.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, that's great.
Perfect. That's great. So much for the technical bit. No, that's fine. We'll let Bob speak on that. I'll come back in a bit later on that. But it's basically our hall was uninsulated, as most things were that were built at the beginning of the 20th century or any time in the 19th century. So our big point was to make it comfortable, insulate it, no matter what form of heating it was, and that was our primary aim, and that was the thing, and make it more pleasant. We had people that just wouldn't come into the hall in the wintertime unless there was a Kaylee, in which case there was plenty of heat.
Thanks, Bob. And Beth, what about you?
I think our sort of decarbonisation project came after COVID, when that's when I got involved in the management committee, and we're very much looking at the sustainability of the hall and looking at can this hall carry on. And with energy prices then going up, we decided it was essential to change the way we were paying our bills, change the way the hall was run in order to make it sustainable. So it was almost this or no more hall really for Haddenham community. So it was a very pressing issue. But also what attracted me to the committee was a really good, strong committee of committed people working together. So it was an attractive prospect to get involved in the first place, and then an issue to solve was really interesting and a good challenge.
Thank you. And we'll pick up on some of those finance questions as well as we go through. David, from your own perspective in Trent.
Well, I think the green element was slightly subsidiary at the start. We really wanted to improve and update a building also built in 1923, like I guess many memorial halls after the First World War were probably. But it was very tired and a bit sad. It wasn't particularly cold, but it wasn't very welcoming. So we wanted to basically future-proof it for the next 50 or 100 years. And the green element became an important, but as I say, sort of not driving factor at the start.
Thank you very much, David. So and actually I'm just going to bring in Deborah at this point, which Deborah, do you want to just perhaps, because this has come up a little bit in the chat as well, just want to give an overview at this point as to what support and funding is currently available to village halls who want to start on projects like the ones that we've just been hearing about. Oh, can't hear you at the moment, Deborah. I think you might be on mute.
Here we go. Sorry. Yeah, I think, of course, the main point is to read and take note of Ben's design guide, because it's got probably all the information in it you could possibly want. From a support perspective, Village Hall committees should probably first contact their local ACRE member. One in every county, as Village Hall you'll probably know. You can then talk to your hall advisor. They'll be extremely experienced in everything to do with village halls. They'll know what village halls are doing across the county, so they can put you in touch with other village halls, and they will be able to give you advice and steer you towards the national and the local funding points. As far as funding goes, I think it's already been mentioned in the guide. In order to fund a project like this, you're not just going to be able to get one pot. You're going to have to apply probably to 2 or 3 and put a package of funding together. At this point in time, specifically for energy efficiency works, there is government funding, and that's available through an organisation called Groundwork, who are delivering it on behalf of government. And if just Google Groundwork VCSE energy efficiency grants, you'll find it if you haven't come across it already. What else have we got? The ACRE is currently running the Platinum Jubilee Village Halls Fund. At the moment, there are small grants available. Now, for the small grants, you can get up to £5,000. So if you've got a £20,000 project, which probably would help you get quite a fair way towards energy efficiency projects, then do have a look on our website and put in a small application. There'll be more news about the additional money that was announced in the budget shortly, but we don't have all the detail available yet. So that's the funds that we can steer you towards. If you want to look at a loan, then ACRE has loans that they can offer to village halls as well. There are also other pots of funding, the details of which your local advisor will probably have, but to name but a few, there will be the Bernard Sunley, there's the Garfield Weston Foundation, and of course there's always the lottery, whether that's the small grants or one of their bigger pots. So that's sort of the advice that I would offer. Somebody asked a question that said, did we have any top tips? From experience of managing some of these grant funds, I think I'd say you need to know, do all your research. You need to know what it is you're doing, and you need to make a plan. Yes, you need to have somebody who's researching and looking into finance, but until you really know what you've got to do, what those funders expect of you, it's no good just rushing in to put in applications. Please, please, please check the criteria. Read the information that the funders provide. A lot of our applications just fall down because people haven't read whether they're eligible or not. They haven't read the detail. They've just thought, oh, let's have a go. So that's not a good way to go, and that wouldn't be a top tip at all. Yeah, so be very thorough, cross all your dot your I's and cross your T's. Make sure you've got all your information up together. That would be sort of my top tips, really. So yeah, James, I hope that's helpful. Quite quick, but yeah.
No, really helpful, Deborah. And as I said, we'll now head into perhaps some of the more specifics around it, and I'll try and as much as I can, pick up on some of the questions in the chat as we go through. So I think maybe so there's a couple of themes. So I'm going to move to talk about funding, and obviously you just touched on that, Deborah, as well. But I mean, Bob, perhaps I can go to you first, Bob Towers. And do you want to just say a little bit, kind of an overview of how you approached this question of kind of getting the funding together? And did you know how much you needed to raise, and did it stay or did it go up? And do you want to say a little bit about that and any top tips around funding, I guess, picking up on that question?
We started off very fortunately with a £50,000 lottery development grant. And with an architect, we went through the REBA planning process, which would take us all the way through to getting tenders. Unfortunately, that was pre-COVID. And having 50,000 for a development fund, we thought we would pick up 100,000 plus from lottery and possibly some of the other grant funders. After COVID, everything changed, and we found that the grants were capped in the case of the lottery and environmental agencies between 30 and 40,000. At the same time, the building industry had gone into chaos. And while the grants were going one way, all the costs went the other way. So we found that our expected grant funding of maybe 300,000 for the whole project had trebled to demands in tenders from 700,000 to 900,000 plus VAT. So a huge gap between what we needed to find and the building costs, which resulted really at the end of the day in us having to change the project from an overall refurbishment of the hall into phases. And our phase one then was changed quite dramatically and focuses only on the hall itself, the main hall, rather than the other elements of the hall. And to get even that kind of money, we tried to keep a sort of phase of 100,000, but that wasn't anywhere near what we needed. We were looking then at possibly now 200,000 and a bit more with VAT, and then multiple grant funding. And perhaps one key tip for grant funding is, okay, plug away, make sure you know what, as Deborah says, what you're applying for, but you end up with a package of dominoes. Some of the funding is up front, some of it is a percentage up front, and some at the end of the project, and some of it is even retrospective, which in that case, we go back to Deborah and the ACRE grants, ACRE loan. So it's a multi-package, but it's fairly hard work in the sense that to write a bid for £10,000 is probably as hard as to write one where you'd expect for 100,000. But there's horses for courses out there, and you just keep plugging away.
Thank you, Bob. I was about to say perseverance sounds like kind of a key kind of skill here, as well as that sort of breaking the project down into different sections that can make it feel a bit more manageable. I mean, just before kind of moving on from the funding thing, Ben, I don't know, I think there was a question on the chat around the organisations who you mentioned in your presentation, who obviously they supported us with the guide, but are any of those worth approaching, and do any of those do us a good deal?
The sponsors, absolutely. I mean, get in touch with them. I know they're very keen they're in this for the long term, not just to have their sales featured in the guidance, and they're keen to sort of take their relationships with ACRE on into the future. So I would say, go to their specific pages. A lot of them have actually set up pages on their websites specifically for village halls with contact forms to get in touch with them. So I think that'd be quite receptive to inquiries on that. As for special deals to be had, I mean, ask them, see what they can do. We've not negotiated any kind of discounts. I believe Baxi may have something that's running with ACRE that probably ACRE want to release more details of at a suitable time. The others, really, it's just a case of asking them. But the sponsorship they've been providing really has been more in terms of getting the guidance going. Although I'm sure they're all very keen to give a competitive deal if they're approached.
Thanks, Ben. And if ACRE colleagues want to say any more, and perhaps they can put that in the chat. So I'm going to move on actually from funding to talk about technology. Quite a lot of questions around technology. I'm going to start, I think, though, by just asking Bob Provencher, actually, just do you want to, in terms of technology, you know, what was the sort of game changer technology for you? And then I'll, so that's to Bob P. And then we'll move on from that to open up to some of those other questions that people have asked.
Well, it wasn't as much the technology as it was the idea, the availability of a grant to help us with the infrared panels.
Right.
We had an architect, as Bob Towers had said, very early in the process, and went through with the intent to completely insulate the whole building. And we, as Bob mentioned, we broke this up into phases. So phase one was the main hall, which involved very good insulation of the main hall, which allowed us to use the used infrared panels and infrared heaters, relying on electricity from infrared panels or from PV panels. Fortunately for us, our main hall roof is orientated to the true south, which is the perfect. It's considered a perfect alignment for PV panels because you get a good mix summer and winter. We had a roof that was large enough to encompass a total of 60 PV panels. You couldn't put another panel on that roof. The PV installer just covered it. So the PV installer, along with the roofer, were able to do that. And we looked at the system. The system's a total of 19.5 kilowatt hours. So it's 60 panels at 325 watts each, which gives you the 19,500 kilowatt hours. In truth, you don't actually get all that because of clouds, et cetera. But last year, we, as Ben mentioned at the opening of all this, we generated 17,400, just slightly under 17,500 kilowatt hours. With the insulation that we looked at, that the architect had looked at, and the numbers we'd looked at early on, that was enough to make the hall basically zero when the whole building is finished. That was enough to make the hall zero carbon. We would be able to produce as much electricity as we would consume in a year. Not necessarily at the right time, of course. So you generate a lot of electricity in the summer. We can generate over 130 kilowatt hours in one day during the summer. In the winter, you might generate 10 kilowatt hours in a day. So in the winter, when you really need to pay for the heat, we'll have to be paying for some heat. But during the transition months, like it is now in March through October, well, in after the winter, before summer, these months we're coming into our own. And our system right now is, I've got a live thing here right now. We were generating at a rate of 17 kilowatt hours right now. So it's more than paying for the. So we're actually generating electricity. We're heating the hall that's being worked on right now because we're not finished. So there's workers in the hall, and we're actually being paid for a little bit for the money for the extra power that's going back into the grid. So it was, and we decided to do that because our hall is not used on a every day on a normal basis. Had we decided to use the hall on a regular basis, as if we had an office or something that was going on every day, we would probably pump for a ground source heat pump. But yeah, the IR infrared technology with the storage batteries, we have 52.2 kilowatt hours worth of storage batteries, which is quite a lot. So we're charging our batteries and using it. So we'll charge the batteries over during the day, heat the hall overnight, and from this time through maybe to October, we shouldn't have too much in the way of electricity bills.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Bob. And well, does that I might come to Ben actually, just because there's a range of questions, just picking up on this sort of technological theme. And Ben, I don't know whether you want to pick up on some of these yourself and or drawing colleagues, but there's a kind of question there, just picking up from what Bob was just saying around batteries and the extent to which people are advised to use batteries, obviously becoming much more popular, I think, now in terms of storage. Then there's a question around, while we're still on sort of solar, around solar panels versus heat pumps, and are there some negative potential implications of heat pumps? And then also just a couple of other areas which aren't to do with solar, around both insulation, floor and cavity walls, and potentially grey water recycling. So I just don't know whether you want to sort of run through some of those, and then obviously do draw in colleagues as necessary.
Okay, James. Yeah, that's fine. So as regard batteries with a PV system, they're not essential. You don't have to. Interestingly, the case study participants we've spoken to generally have got battery systems and generally like having them. But I would say that, with a village hall that's typically being used in the daytime, there is actually a good synergy with, PV panels are making energy in the daytime, which is exactly when the hall would be needing it. So I think it would be interesting to see the difference actually between two halls, one with and one without. I would say it's not essential that you have batteries, but you might find it's useful to have them. You can then charge them up and draw down from them in the evenings, at night time, etc. So yeah, a good idea, but not essential, I'd say on that. In relation to the heat pumps, and we are conscious that there are stories of people having difficulty with heat pumps. You really need to know, I would need to know specifically what happened in those situations. I'm always quite curious to see. We are advocating this three-pronged approach in the design guidance document, which is that number one, you fabric first, you insulate your building so you reduce energy efficiency. And I think quite often this can be a problem if people haven't done that. They're then having to use electricity, which is a higher tariff to gas, to heat their hall. So, the three-pronged approach that we suggest of using insulating, then having the heat pump or infrared heating panels, and then supplementing with the PV. Those three things work together incredibly well. And I don't understand why people wouldn't see a reduction in energy use, cost, and carbon emissions when you do that. What was the other aspect on? Was there another aspect to the PV, James, you wanted to ask?
I think it was just whether there are any implications for higher energy bills that were coming out if you.
Well, yeah, and again, the design guidance is quite upfront about this because it is a fact that electricity is more expensive than gas. Heat pumps, though, however, have a coefficient of potential of between 3 and 4 across the year. So for every 1 kilowatt you put in, 3 kilowatts come out, which to a large extent then offsets that. And again, if you couple it with the PV to then feed, then the great thing about the PV panels is, with an electric system such as infrared heating or a heat pump, you use that energy to feed it directly. You can't do that with a gas boiler or an oil boiler. So we think it's very important to kind of use these technologies together.
That's great. And then I think the other ones were more just before we move on from the sort of technology section. Ben, anything you want to say around sort of wider technologies? Insulation, floor insulation, cavity wall insulation, and grey water, grey water recycling. Are there examples of halls using those sorts of technologies?
Yeah, absolutely, James. Insulation is the key. And again, I would say what I said before, start off with that, particularly the roof. Village halls lose a lot of heat through the roof because of the format of them, far more than houses do. So whereas a house might typically, let's say, lose 25% of its heat through the roof, for village hall, it's more like 40%. Then after the roof, look at the walls and the windows. And then we would say, finally, look at the floor. Less heat is lost through the floor. It's also slightly more difficult to insulate because of the nature of kind of where it is and whether it's a solid floor or whether it's a suspended floor. If it's a suspended floor, you can lift it and you can put insulation in between the floor joists. Ideally, you want to complete that envelope so that you're not losing heat anywhere. Grey water, we didn't actually cover that a lot in the guidance. There's been mixed feedback in recent years as to how effective that is and questioning the benefits versus the drawbacks. So I'm open-minded about it personally, but we didn't actually include it in the guidance. We've tried to stick to kind of the key big wins, the simple measures that are proven largely beyond any doubt that they are effective.
Thank you, Ben. I'm just wondering from my panel. I mean, for example, David, did you want to comment in terms of the Trent experience? You know, what have you installed? What are you thinking about? Any comments on those technological points that just came up?
Well, we've done the insulation bit. We've put in air source heating, LED lighting, and so on. So we've done quite a lot of the things that Ben referred to, and we're now looking at solar panels and batteries and all of that part of the discussion that we've been having. And I think we're very much in the phasing of this. You know, we haven't had the resources to do it all in one go. We've tried to do it in a sensible, phased way. So I completely agree with whoever said that on funding you have to be resilient and keep plugging away. It does come from a multitude of sources. But as the funding becomes available, you can do the next phase or the next bit of the next phase that you've got in your plan. So it is very helpful to know, you know, if we had some more money or if we could get some more money, where would we, what further green elements would we then install? But we've certainly found that the insulation and the heat pumps and so on have greatly improved the comfort of the hall. Our costs haven't gone up actually, even though the usage has gone up quite a lot because it's a more attractive facility. So it does seem to be economically sound as well as environmentally.
Thank you very much, David. And actually, I'm just looking at the chat as we speak. I know various colleagues are kind of putting their own experience in the chat. So there was a question, I think, for example, on where people have found funding for these kinds of technologies and PV panels. So if you've got an example, please do bung that in the chat. That would be really helpful. I'm just going to ask one more question that comes out of the implications of that to Deborah, and then I'm going to move on to a different theme. So Deborah, I just wondered, there was a question specifically around the VAT implications if you do find your electricity bills going up to a certain level. Do you want to just pick up on that, please?
Yeah, I think Nikki asked the question, but I think what she was saying was that because a lot of village halls use the de minimis levels of power, then they get reduced back up at 5%. But if, as in this particular problem, it's costing them more money to run their heat pumps, then they're now paying the 20% instead of the 5%. So I think that I think Nikki's question was just a comment that because the heat pumps don't appear to be working as they think they should, they're now paying more VAT than they would normally. But I suppose from the VAT point of view, as from the 1st of February, is 0% VAT on installing energy efficiency materials. So from the 1st of February 2024 to the 31st of March 2027, you shouldn't be paying VAT on installation of energy efficient energy saving measures, ESMs. So yeah, that's off the VAT issue at the moment. But I don't mind it. One of the things that I seem to be picking up in the comments coming through, James, is that people are asking questions about old buildings in particular. Somebody's asking about cavity insulation, and they're saying where buildings are 150 years old, they're having difficulty finding advice. Somebody else said their building is 1971, and somebody else is asking about corrugated roofs. So I think these are particular issues for for village halls, and I don't know if anyone can throw any light on those. Really, they're quite specific.
I was going to say, Ben, back to you on that one. Any specific advice on those particularly for people with these?
I honestly would say, thanks, James. Honestly, I would say we have a look at the guide, because it doesn't answer every question, but it should cover most of these scenarios. I mean, things like, I'm not sure about the corrugated panels on the roof. You know, if you're thinking about putting solar panels on the roof, and it says this in the guide, you need to make sure your roof's structurally sound. So you probably will need a structural engineer to have a look at that because of the increased weight on it. If you're in any doubt about it, have an engineer look at it. You don't want to be putting panels on the roof if you think the underlying substrate isn't suitable. So one of the first things it says in the guidance is, when you're getting started, make sure your building is structurally sound and is waterproof, because they're the key things. That there's no point insulating and doing all this work if the kind of, the fundamentals aren't right. So make sure that the actual fabric and the condition of the building is all addressed as part of this package of energy improvements.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm going to move on to a new theme now, but just to pick up, actually, when I talk about the chat, I have the luxury, I think, of being able to see comments from every channel that we've got. But if you're joining on YouTube, or you'll be seeing the YouTube comments. If you're joining on Facebook, you'll be seeing the Facebook comments and so on. But hopefully, I'll bring that into the discussion as we go along, and you'll see also that we're trying to pick up where we can questions on the bottom of the screen. What we have done is we've just posted, I think, the link to the guidance in all of those channels. So hopefully people can have a look at that. I'm just going to move on then to another theme, which obviously Ben touched on in his presentation. I might come to Beth, if that's okay, Beth. Just around how did you involve the community in the proposals? You know, how did that? Any tips around that in terms of engaging and then getting people's support for what you were planning to do?
Yeah, so we did quite a lot of that before we started the project, and partly funding bids will channel you towards doing that, because you need to provide evidence that you've consulted with people. So we got hard evidence and stats through SurveyMonkey, which went out widely, and did other shorter bits of publicity and PR through social media and website. And when you've got a committee together, they tend to, this is a generalization, but they tend to be people who are invested in the community and have a lot of networks and links. And I think using those networks was a really key thing, making sure that everyone on our committee was talking to people they knew in the community about the project, so that the ripple effect happened of other people talking about it positively in other areas, other meetings, other arenas, and would spread the word and have that positive reflection on the project. We're lucky in Haddenham to have quite a lot of green agendaed groups in the village. So we've got a group called Zero Carbon Haddenham. We've got a community orchard and a nature reserve working group. We've also got a community-run greengrocer. So those are all obvious places to network with those people, get them on board, get them talking about it as well. And then I suppose a conscious effort at communications around the building works and the disruption that might happen. So the building was sort of unavailable for a really short time, but being very communicative about that and about the people living near to the hall, what disruption there might be. And to go back then to the funding bids, those bits of information that we gleaned from SurveyMonkey and from the local community, we put those into funding bids, as well as case studies of people who'd used the halls. So very much keeping in touch with our user base at the hall, case studies and quotes from people, to all showing that support for the project. So when I thought about this, it was quite extensive. It didn't feel extensive at the time because it happened quite naturally, but it was quite, when you put that together, that's quite a lot. But it happened through, like I say, through a kind of a networked committee that we're already in it, and those are people we know. So yeah, it's quite a lot of work, but it does happen sort of organically, I suppose.
So that key thing about understanding what networks are already there and making sure you're tapping into them So, and just in terms of the sort of impact, then, do you feel, having gone through the project? So I'll ask this to Beth, but maybe I'll also ask others as well. How are the community now much more engaged around environmental issues, and indeed, what's the impact been, if you like, more generally on the community of the work that you've done? Beth, did you want to?
Yeah, I don't. Unless anyone else wants to take it, but I think people are much more aware of decarbonisation and environmental impacts than they were before. So that's partly through, as well as the solar panel project and the heat pump project. The committee made people more aware of, turning off lights, not using the heating in a way they wouldn't in their own home. So that sort of awareness definitely had a trickle effect on our users. And then people seeing the solar panels on the village hall, it's right in the middle of the village and it's very visible. So it's a really good example of doing it and how you can do it. It overrides some of those fears maybe about it being an eyesore or it being something that's going to change the vibrancy of the village, and it kind of heads off a few of those worries, I think. So people, I haven't heard anyone talk negatively about it. It's been very positive.
Thank you, Beth. And David, can I ask the same question to you in terms of both scientific, I suppose. How did you go about engaging the community, and what's the impact been having done so?
Yeah, I mean, we went through a slightly more formal process, I think, than Beth's described, in the sense that a few years before this project, there'd been a slightly contentious one in Trent about the possibility of a community shop being built. And that had actually divided people rather than brought them together, because it wasn't handled very well on the community engagement front. So, conscious of that experience, we were determined to do it differently. And so we had a number of village meetings. We got the architect along to put out a couple of options for the way we could do this project. So we really tried to, and we did the things that Beth mentioned about letters of support and information and so on. But we did try quite hard to engage people, because we knew that if the community worked with us in a small place, it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to succeed. And if I'd been a grant funder, I wouldn't have been very sympathetic either. So we put a lot of effort into that bit of the process, and spent maybe a couple of years getting all of that in a row before we started applying for grants, which seemed to pay off quite well. What's the engagement been like? I mean, I think incredibly positive feedback about the hall as it now is. I'm not sure people pick out the green element specifically because it was all part of a major improvement project, but they do like things like the heating and the LED lighting and so on, and the fact that it's a more comfortable building. So I think we're only measuring it really, apart from comments to us, by the usage, which has definitely gone up quite significantly. And that seems to be the most sincere form of praise, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, David. And of course, I guess there will be people who take inspiration there into their own, their own projects from their own houses as well. And I've just been thinking about that actually as we've been going. And finally, well, Bob T, anything you want to say on this theme, I suppose, around involving the community and the impact then when you got the new hall open on the community?
Yeah, I mean, we had the advantage of having 2 5-year plans promoted by Skelton Parish Council, of which the hall was a significant feature in one. And in the second 5-year plan, we actually put in a survey about what people would like to see the new hall to look like. And that's proved to be very, very helpful with grant funding. And as Beth says, you've got to have a whole backup to prove that you've actually consulted the community. We did that locally with the hall users as well through various circulation of information. And we did a 600 letter drop to every household. And we did it online as well. A very vital aspect of anything that's going to happen in the hall. As far as its effect, we're about to find out. We have our first open day on Saturday with the people coming to see the hall for the first time. Not quite complete, but almost ready, and we're looking for a very positive reaction.
Thank you very much, Bob. Well, good luck with that. Certainly the pictures look fantastic, so from what I could see. So, okay, I've got just a couple more questions I'm going to pick up on, and one which perhaps is sort of underlying a number of comments is really sort of what were the key lessons learnt for our colleagues who've been involved in doing these projects. What would you, if you had your time again, what was the one thing that you would pass on to those thinking about doing this? So again, I'll go round, but maybe David, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, that's a challenging question. I think on grant funding, be resilient and keep plugging away, as people have said. It's not that easy. I reckon we got about a 40% success rate, maybe less. So, you have to do a lot of applications to make progress, but you can. The other thing, we got slightly caught out by the cost of the professional advice we'd employed, if I can put it that way. I think it might be worth trying to get a pretty firm agreement on costs of the consultancy support you're getting up front, because we found that got a bit was more expensive than we planned for, shall we say. So that was a useful lesson. And also, you don't have to do all this in one go. You can phase it, as people have said, and that can work extremely well if you get your phasing right. Then there's no reason why you can't spread it out over a number of years. People don't expect instant results, and it's quite hard to do it all in one go.
Thanks, David. And I'll go to Beth next. I know, Beth, you may have to leave us just before the end. So if you could pick up on any sort of key lessons learned from your perspective that you'd like to pass on to colleagues.
Yeah, it's difficult. A bit like David said, I think some of the things that weren't so smooth weren't within our control in the first place. So I'm trying to think what could be better. If you could make everyone else, do what you wanted when you wanted, that would be great. But that's not possible. And I don't know. I think something along the lines of accepting that there'll be stress points. I don't know. So knowing that there will be stress points in terms of juggling funders and their requirements, the timings with contractors, the prices going up, and accepting you can't really control everything, may have stopped us trying to control it all. On the whole, it was relatively stress-free. I'm not saying it was hugely stressful, but accepting that there'll be a level of stress, and how you just talking through how you might handle that within your committee, and just talking about this is going to be could be tricky at times. So having that communication with your committee and the backup to talk about that is just a useful part in any project. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Beth, and obviously thanks to you if you do have to leave us before the end as well.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you so much.
And okay, and I'll just go to either of you, Bob. So maybe Bob P. Let's go to you first. Any kind of top tips, key lessons from your experience in Scotland?
I think that the first one is to be prepared for the long haul, and to have alternative plans. In one sense, we were spoilt and foiled by the fact of having a £50,000 development plan. And as Beth said, that can run away with itself. And we didn't have total control of that, but that 50,000 was spent. And that is an astronomical amount of money. And then to find, obviously, that we didn't have as much to do the build. I think we want to stress you take advantage of all help that's available. Obviously, ACRE and the local agency for us in Cumbria's Act, absolutely essential to be in touch with them. to use the talent you've got in the area, not necessarily as trustees, but maybe try and build a body of talent that will come in and support you, especially on technical issues. It helps if you have somebody like Bob P, who is very good at managing technical issues and was able, in fact, to manage the energy side of it, the solar panels. So that was done as a separate contract to the main insulation that was being run through the architect. So we've had experience of both, of going through an architect and a builder, and then also having an individual managing a separate project. And we can weigh up the pros and cons of both those approaches. I think, as has been stressed, you've got to be prepared for multi-grant applications. Use now the VAT changes. That seems to be a big incentive. And perhaps beef up your governing body. There's going to be some comings and goings. It is quite a commitment. And obviously, those of us that retired can put in more time than others, but it can become full time if you're not careful.
Really helpful, Bob. Thank you. And I think Bob P, I think your sound, you've had some technical issues with the sound. So I think if you have anything to add, can I suggest you put it in the chat? Because I think when you started to speak a second ago, we couldn't hear you, unfortunately. So I'm going to do two final points then. If I go first to Deborah, it's a sort of slightly different lens, I suppose. But any from your overview, supporting and answering lots and lots of questions on this area. What would you say is the kind of biggest lesson that you've picked up from speaking to many people? What would you want to leave people with?
I think the consultation with the community and getting them on board, and then as a committee, really, really working out what you want to do, how you want to do it. So it is really, really about, I think it's about the planning and working together. And I think that's a really good starting point.
Thank you. And Ben, final word to you. You've obviously written the guide, spoken to lots of people. What's the sort of key success factor, if you like, that you've spotted, if you had to pick one or two things to leave people with?
Yeah, I can only echo others' comments, really, James, to be honest. Make a plan, be ambitious with the plan, I think, as well. But don't think, like David said, that you have to do it all in one go. It can be a phased plan, and just do the right things in the right order. I think it's important. Get the foundations right, that you can build on things as you go. Involve people, absolutely. Really try and don't carry it on your own. It will be much better result and a more enjoyable process, I think, if you genuinely involve as many people as you can in the community. Try and see it as a kind of not only a building project, but also a kind of community cohesion project, an attempt to really bring people together and see what skills there are in the village. And I think if you do that, there's a chance you could also, I say enjoy it, but, try and enjoy it. I know it can be hard. It's a huge undertaking. But the people we've spoken to on the case studies, I think, they've been through it and come out the other side kind of, pleased and proud of what they've achieved. So I think, it really is a tough journey, but a very worthwhile one.
Thanks, Ben. And and I suppose what struck me just listening to people, and indeed from the guidance as well, obviously there's the environmental benefit. There's a kind of win-win-win here, isn't there? There's you've got the green benefits, you've got the comfort benefits, and you potentially got the ongoing cash income stream benefits as well. And then potentially having a wider network and putting the village hall even more in the centre of kind of community life. So it does feel like people who've gone through this have been a huge, it's been a huge number of things to celebrate. So well, with that, I think I'm conscious that we're sort of heading towards the end of our time. So I'm going to draw this morning's session to a close. Can I first of all thank all of our panelists for giving up their time this morning. So the two Bobs from Skelton Topping in Cumbria, Beth from Haddenham, David from Trent, who shared so willingly their own experience and advice, and you can read more in the guidance. The guidance is now live. It can be downloaded from the website. I think we put the link there in various places. Put it in the chat. You can see it there on screen now. Can I also thank Philip Vincent and the Acre team? Philip, you haven't seen Philip on screen, but he's been the inspiration behind the live stream. He's on screen. There we are. Nice.
Oh, there he is.
He's very modest. He doesn't like to be in the lineup, but he's done a huge amount of work behind the scenes to bring this together. He's been working with all of us with our mixed technological abilities, I think it's fair to say. So he's been extremely patient as that's come together. It's been the first time I've used this technology. Really interesting to see how it works, as well as a lot of work you'll see on social media and elsewhere. So please do have a look at whatever channel you're looking at and get that, promote both the guidance itself, but also what you're doing yourselves in your village halls. So please do and continue to engage in activities and discussion over the course of the week. As I said at the start, please share your stories. Hashtag is Village Halls Week. And thank you, all of you, for watching, and all the very best. And we'll close it there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, James.